Good morning all. Thank you, Sue. So I will invite our panellists. Come on down. Frederick Hauser, Jennifer Moltisanti, excellent, and Chris Maddock. Hi everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Mel Yates. I'm one of the directors at the ACNC, and it is my pleasure to chair this session titled Changes to Charity Reporting Obligations. We've got three great panellists today. I'll introduce them and then we will proceed to provide an opportunity for each of them to spend up to 7 minutes talking about their perspective and their context. Then we'll finish up with an opportunity for questions. So please, I encourage you, if you haven't already, on your table there is a piece of paper that tells you how to connect to Slido. Please connect up and submit your questions. We want to hear from you today. It's your chance to interact. So the panel. Welcome everyone. I'll start with Frederick, who's over on the far my right-hand side. Frederick's the Deputy Technical Director at the Australian Accounting Standards Board. Now, Frederick is a not-for-profit sector lead, and he brings his experience across financial control and reporting, accounting policy, audit advisory and due diligence services with a range of organisations both locally and overseas. Some of his prior roles include Head of Treasury, Financial Control at a major Australian bank, and Account Director at a Big Four accounting firm advising clients on various aspects of financial reporting. And Frederick also has served on management committees of several NFP organisations. Moving on to Jennifer. Welcome, Jennifer. Jennifer is the Assistant Commissioner at the Not-for-Profit Sector and Not-for-Profit Centre, and Government at the Australian Taxation Office. Jennifer's focus is directed at strengthening the integrity of tax administration for NFP and government clients. Jennifer has held a diplomatic role with Australia's permanent delegation to the OECD as Australia's first Minister, Councillor Taxation. And Jennifer was recently appointed as the ATO's Diversity Champion for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. Our third panellist, Chris, in the middle. I won't say the rose between two thorns. Chris is the chairperson from One Care Geelong and brings a very valuable charity perspective to this panel. So in 2015, Chris commenced what he terms as his repurposed stage of life. Rather than retirement, Chris now sits on 4 separate boards for organisations who are all registered charities with the ACNC. Prior to Chris's repurposing, he was the business manager at Christian College Geelong, a large independent school with 4 separate campuses, 2 preschool centres, a dairy farm and a cafe, to provide over 2,000 students with a Christian College Geelong education. Now, people often ask Chris, well, what does it mean being a business manager of a school? To which Chris replies, simply everything that is not directed to classroom teaching. So welcome to our panellists. We'll hear from Freddie first, and the way we're going to approach this session, Freddie, you're at the concept stage of reporting as a standard setter. So often your timeframes are well into the horizon, and I'm interested in hearing what changes to charity reporting that you're seeing on the horizon, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me? No? What about now? Excellent, thank you. Thanks for having me and thanks for ACNC to organise such a wonderful day. Very happy to be here. And yes, you're right, we don't tend to change financial reporting requirements too often to maintain stability and our stakeholders sane in terms of the financial reporting. So I will have probably 3 areas to cover or to touch on briefly. First is the simplification, then we'll talk about post-implementation reviews, and third area is something what I would call reporting beyond traditional financial reporting. So the first simplification, You probably heard, hopefully everyone in this room, about our flagship project, the Tier 3 financial reporting, where we are trying to come up with the simplified requirements for smaller, not-for-profit organizations, including charities. We issued the discussion paper second half last year with a 6-month consultation period and collected feedback until, I think, March this year, and received a huge amount of feedback, I think around 500-600 interactions with stakeholders through survey, which was our most successful way how to collect feedback at this stage, plus a number of virtual and in-person outreach sessions. Anyway, board considered this feedback and decided to progress to the next stage of that project, which is to develop an exposure draft, where they will consider the feedback, and at some point, probably next year, we will come up with an exposure draft in a paragraph form to consult again with the sector, and hopefully that will include all of you, how to implement this standard to help reduce reporting burden, if you want, in the sector, and maintain and possibly even improve comparability and consistency of those financial statements. So hand in hand with the Tier 3, they would be going ahead with proposals to remove ability to prepare special purpose financial statements for certain not-for-profit entities. So that's the Tier 3 in terms of the simplification. Post-implementation reviews, in terms of with our evidence-based approach, we do normally do post-implementation reviews after 2 years, after a standard was in place, to see whether it's working as intended. And we did, again, recently with not-for-profit specific standards like consolidation, income and revenue accounting, and related parties. So staff at the moment is going through that feedback, and board will be considering whether to take any action in terms of the standard setting, education, etc. in coming months. So last, but definitely not least, is that area, what I call extended reporting, non-financial reporting. And I would mention two areas. One is service performance reporting. So that's the project we reactivated following our recent agenda consultation, and is looking how to enable not-for-profit entities again to report on their impact and how they are achieving objectives, which is probably sometimes even more important than their financial reporting. And we are looking to our New Zealand friends to possibly piggyback on their FRS 48, which is in place now for a few years. Even bond mandatory came recently. The second bit is the sustainability reporting that you may have seen the Treasury consultation on the scope and the government policy. And once that scope and policy is finalized, we are working and will be performing our local outreach in terms of Australian-specific sustainability standards. So that's where I will probably pause, and happy to take any questions now or later. Thanks.
Thanks, Freddie. Hopefully this microphone will kick in. There we go. Thank you very much. So, Jennifer, as a regulator, you're regulating aspects of standard setters that Freddie has alluded to. You're also meeting expectations of government. So what changes to reporting obligations are you prioritising at the moment?
Oh, thank you so much, Mel, and thanks, Freddie, for your introduction as well to some of the new regulations that are coming through. So I might make 3 points. I'll answer the question by making perhaps 3 points. I'll just cover quickly our role. The second aspect will be the new reporting obligations that are coming through, and the third aspect might be just to highlight what charities can do now and what you can take away with you. So first and foremost, our role, as you know, we have remit for the whole of the not-for-profit sector, but we work very closely with the ACNC. And the ACNC obviously regulates charities, but we look after the tax and super aspects. So most people would say, well, what's tax got to do with it? I think there's a common sort of misunderstanding in the community that not-for-profits, including charities, are exempt all taxes. Well, that's not the case. In fact, you know, charities have access to tax charity concessions, but most of them some of them are registered for GST, and most of them have employer obligations. And so there are significant employer obligations. So your interaction with the office, you know, will occur from time to time when you are meeting those obligations. The second aspect, you will have seen through a lot of the correspondence that's starting to occur from the tax office that we have some significant new reporting obligations that are coming through. So from the 1st of July this year, non-charitable not-for-profits with an active ABN will need to start lodging a return with the tax office. It's not an income tax return, but it is a return, and this return really satisfies their entitlement to income tax exemption. So up until now, the vast majority of not-for-profits, about 70% of the population, have been self-assessing income tax exemption, and they really haven't reported anything to the ATO. And as you heard from both Canada and Singapore, data is really important. And so we want to get some visibility of which categories they're actually sort of self-assessing income tax exemption against. So the first returns will be lodged from next year between 1 July and 31st October. So it'll follow the normal tax time period. So that doesn't mean that you've got until then to turn your mind to it. So if you do know anyone that is self-assessing as income tax exempt, you might get them to start thinking about their entitlement to that exemption. Now, there's a lot of information that we have pulled out, and if you are sort of taking notes, I have provided Mel with a 14-page slide deck, and all of the information in that slide deck is in the public domain. You can rely on it. It has been designed as a tear and share, so that if there's information that you you can sort of take that slide out and share it with your networks. And the third aspect is what can you take away from it. So I suppose from if I look at the not-for-profit population more broadly, it's a fairly good population. 225,000. They're pretty much lodging on time, paying on time. But it's interesting when we take a little bit more of a granular look at that population, we're a little bit surprised to see some of the larger charities perhaps not meeting all of their obligation from a lodgement and payment perspective. And so this is just a shout out that if you are experiencing difficulties with meeting your obligations, I would say reach out to us soon, because there's so much that we can do to assist not-for-profits, indeed all organisations in the tax system. So there are very generous, payment plans that can be put in place, but also other certain concessions that we can consider. So if you are experiencing difficulty, please reach out. We have a dedicated advice service that we provide Monday to Friday, 8 till 6 p.m. You can also contact us on our dedicated email services. Most of you have probably already accessed those services. And of course, in the slide deck, you've got all of that information. We do have a not-for-profit newsroom. We push out a lot of messages through there. And if you haven't joined me on LinkedIn, please do so, because again, we push out a lot of messages through that channel as well.
Shameless self-promotion there, Jennifer.
Absolutely.
I love it. I love it. And finally, Chris, now you provide, as I said, a very valuable charity perspective. So you're at the coalface implementing what we've already covered. What do these changes mean to you practically?
Well, thanks for that, Mel. I have to say I'm feeling a bit fearful sitting next to the tax lady. I'm also glad that I'm no longer in the education sector where we're not, so I feel I'm escaping a bit here. But I've been asked to sort of highlight three key areas that are forming challenges for particularly small not-for-profits. But before I do so, I want to give a little bit of context, and I've robbed a bit of information that's come from the ACNC, and that is that 50% of not-for-profits don't have any staff at all, no paid staff. They're all run by volunteers. So that in itself poses a significant difficulty for charities, and is a cause of many of the issues of compliance. And I'm glad to hear David, wasn't it? Yes, some of that information, I'm going to grab some of that where I can. But so most volunteers aren't aware of those things, and because they're not educated, they're not trained, they're not exposed to those particular areas. But The first challenge I want to share with you is in relation to banking, which can be a real challenge for not-for-profits. And recently we were approached by our bank at their request to change our EFTPOS machine. And part of their compliance is that they wanted to do a company search on all our current directors. And but the bank went to the ASIC website, and when I tried to explain, and they were out of date, and I tried to explain to them they need to go to the ACNC website. They ignored that. They wouldn't listen. And so I continued to push that. They said, this is where you need to do it, but their procedures were that they needed to rely on the ASIC website. So after this conversation went on, and 6 weeks later, we got our EFTPOS machine. And the way around that procedure was that I had to get all the current directors to now sign a statutory declaration. But, you know, the whole process of having to take 6 weeks in order to do that was quite frustrating. The second one is related to related party transactions. And with the introduction of the new related party transactions, which is, you know, designed for, I believe, good reasons in providing confidence into the public and supporter areas, that they have confidence in the sector in terms of the use of the funds that we are using. But there's been interesting discussion around boards in relation to what does this really mean and what does it really look like and how we can comply. And while there's a lot of useful information on the ACNC, and I've been a beneficiary of that, there's still some challenges because, as I said, many of the not-for-profit are relying heavily on volunteers who have no idea about the requirements of even knowing related party transactions. And those who do have a bit of an idea of saying, look, we've already got a conflict of interest register, why do we need this as well? It just seems another layer of additional work. And those who may even know about it, saying, well, how far down do we need to drill in order to keep the register? What's in and what's out? Even at this week, I've had quite a conversation with a board that I'm involved with in terms of, do we have this in, or do we include this or not include this? So there's still a fair amount of confusion around that. And I shared with Frederick before that I approached several auditors, two of them which are ours, and they have not a lot of information, a lot of awareness on what this really means from even an accounting point of view, in the context of how much gets included in reports, do we need to audit the registers, things of that sort of nature. Finally, I wish to make mention in relation to external conduct standards. While the ECS have admirable intent, to expect countries that don't have these standards is a real challenge for not-for-profits. While the intent of the policy says that you look to the customs and try and make them relevant to the customs and culture of where you send the funds, to broach topics like vulnerability, harassment, protection of children and women and sexual exploitation can be a challenge when they are considered significant taboos in those countries. And it provides a sense of difficulty in implementing good policy around that. With all the good intent there is, it's difficult sometimes to deal with that. I was talking to our friends of mine in Kenya and explaining why we need to do this, and they understood it, but you know, there's different levels of education and training, and the appearance of a lack of trust that goes with expecting to get that information are also significant challenges.
I'm just going to cut in. Apparently we're having trouble hearing you, so I'll get you to use...
Oh, okay, sorry.
So
Okay, sorry. I hope you've got a little bit of that then. And some not-for-profits and excuse me, and some not-for-profits themselves are expressing a level of concern around about, are we really imposing our standard on a country or other places that don't have that expectation within those particular countries? I don't know if I'm being a bit bold here, but I would like to make a suggestion in finishing, is that I wonder whether the ACNC has access or the ability to provide a mentor, particularly to newly registered not-for-profits, to work through the process and at least make them aware of what some of this information that is available to them. I believe at the point of registration would be a good point of capturing them.
Thank you, Chris. We'll bear through. Thank you, Ruby. The opportunity now for questions, and I understand that there are some questions, Tim. So I'll jump to you, please.
Thanks, Mel. So thank you for everyone who's providing questions. If we don't have time to ask them today, we will take them on notice and come back to you. But I might start with you, Freddie. So what are some of the key themes you have received from feedback regarding the simplification of reporting for NFPs?
Thank you. Well, I will start with that there was a significant agreement or support for those proposals. That's why board decided to go ahead. Where some challenges probably will be for us as a staff in drafting is to how to draft simple, because to draft simple is not necessarily the simple task to do, especially if you have already set of accounting standards where every word probably means something, and then we have a set of guidance to explain that. So that's one of the challenges. The other one is many people would like to have that standard short, but that short standard doesn't necessarily mean a lot of guidance. So how to navigate that conflict. The standard will be principle-based. We don't want to have a set of rules because we do want to leave people to, or let people to exercise judgment. But again, judgment means that it's not going to be a checklist for people just to blindly follow. And we can't, because every entity, especially in this sector, will be different and the circumstances will be different. I'm not going to bore you with really technical accounting details, but there are some areas like, for example, how to allow entities to apply Tier 1 or Tier 2 accounting policies if they would like to. Now, what does it mean for the comparability, etc.? So there is a fair bit of details that we need to get through. If you want to go, we can go to our board papers. They are publicly available, and happy to receive any questions. I would probably say half of the areas where we received some feedback will go in detail with the board. The rest is already being drafted as an exposure draft. But rest assured, at some point next calendar year, we'll come back to all of you and we'll be discussing this in a detail when you can see those paragraphs.
Thank you, Freddie. Jennifer, one for you. What activities will the ATO be undertaking to raise awareness amongst the NFP sector that there will be a new return that needs to be lodged?
Well, thanks, Tim, for that question. So already we have our keynote presentations, which have a couple of slides which actually go through the details. I want everyone to remember in this forum that if you are a registered charity, the new reporting requirements do not apply to you. If you are a taxable not-for-profit, the new reporting requirements do not apply to you either. But in addition to the keynote presentations, we are already scheduling webinars with peak bodies. We are doing how-to videos, fact sheets, of course our public advice and guidance. We're trying to simplify it, as Freddie said. It's sometimes quite challenging to make something very technical simple in language, but all of our public advice and guidance has been revised over the last few years, and you will have noticed some of our rulings, for example, have also been made easier to understand with more contemporary examples. So there's a lot that we're actually doing. We are also going to be looking at whether we can leverage tax clinics as well as undertake perhaps some town halls to really mentor some of those smaller organisations into understanding the new reporting requirements, because the biggest challenge that we have is actually getting them to lodge digitally, because the form will only be provided in a digital format. So it'll need to be lodged using online services for business or online services for agents. And so getting everyone into that digital realm is going to be quite challenging for us, and we're looking to the entire sector to help us.
Thank you, Jennifer. Chris, we've got some great feedback for you already. So the issues you raised are ones we often come across, and very grateful to you for describing them today. But there is a question about what you think charities might find useful to help them understand their reporting requirements. Any feedback or any thoughts you have on that?
Well, I think I've shared one in terms of getting connections in relation to new registrations. I think if there can be a direct connection back to the ACNC, I think that would be good. But those who are already pre-existing, that's the challenge, and I think David's found that as a challenge. I guess what it is in recruitment, the recruitment of people who come onto these not-for-profits, particularly the small ones. If they, people who have a compliance mindset, I guess, is the key, and that's always the challenge, because people aren't thinking about compliance when they're starting a charity. They're thinking about, the cause, the why they're doing what they're doing. But I think, it goes to, we've set up a matrix of the sort of people we want on our boards, and I think that's a key thing to determine someone who has that skill and who is linked into the ACNC.
Thank you very much. So the last question, might go back to you, Jennifer. What are the consequences for NFPs who don't lodge a tax or a return, sorry?
Well, we're not going to put them in jail. Look, we're being fairly realistic, and I think we know we undertook some research about 12 months ago to get a sense of what the knowledge base was with the broader not-for-profit population with respect to their tax obligations. And look, we weren't surprised to discover that, as you say, Chris, most people don't set up a not-for-profit or a charity thinking, what are my tax obligations, right? And really it's probably the last thing that they turn their minds to. So we just needed validation of that. We knew that, instinctively we knew that, because I've sat on boards as well, I've set up not-for-profits, and so tax is not at the forefront of your mind. So we know that we start from a very low base. And so if you come to my office, you'll see like there's a bit of a table on my whiteboard that sort of says, if we can get 50% over the line in the first 12 months, we will have had success. And then progressively over the forward years, we, sort of increase that number. So I think, there will be, because it is a return, it is income tax exemption, and it is a return, even though it's not an income tax return. It does fall under the legislative ambits of income tax. So technically there would be failure to lodge penalties. But of course, in those transitionary years, we're looking at lots of concessions to really encourage the sector to come on board. So this is not about, raising revenue. It's about getting that transparency and ensuring that only those that are entitled to those concessions are actually accessing them, because it is all about trust and confidence. As Sue said, there is a community expectation that only those that are entitled, to the concessions are actually accessing them, and the acknowledgement that charities and not-for-profits more broadly deliver significant and really important services to the Australian community.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. What a lovely note to finish on, trust and confidence, and ultimately good reporting by entities, whatever sector they may be in, helps with transparency. So I would like to thank the panel, Frederick, Chris, Jennifer. Thank you very, very much for your insights today. Thank you very much for your questions from attendees and those online. And that concludes this session. We will now break for lunch. Lunch is served just outside of the room that we're here attending today, and we'll see you after lunch. Enjoy.